Can I make this a bigger picture? Oh, so many pixels. Good sleeping boy. Oh, here we go. Here we go again. I am recording this directly after I recorded my last lecture. So Loki is still sleeping pretty heavily right next to me. He's very cute, but this is how he looks sometimes in the evenings, sleeping on my couch. You see the little kitty butt. It's pretty amazing. But anyway, let's move on, shall we? Let's talk about biomedical ethics. Hello and welcome to. Oh, I don't even finish this here. Hello and welcome to week 13 and 14 of biomedical ethics. Please note that there is only one lecture for weeks 13 and 14 as well as there was for weeks 11 and 12. And this is because the content covered in these slides is the only content from the textbook that we are covering. Every time I cough, I swear it's so nerve-wracking. Okay, so last week, or the last unit was on death and dying, on euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide. And so you have these discussion board activities that you're doing for last week. And I pushed the short essay 5 to this week, and we'll talk about that very soon. But first, I want to talk about the, first I want to talk about the assignments for week 13, and then I'll talk about the assignments for week 14, and it's in week 14 that short essay 5 is due, and I'm noticing now that it says it's due on April 24th, which is incorrect. So let's go ahead and update that while I'm still thinking about it. This is a good thing. Like, you're really experiencing what it's like to be in my class in person, because I do this stuff all the time where I'm like, I have to do it immediately. There we go. It's due on April 17th at 11:59 p.m. during week 4 of the class. Oh, where do we go? Here we go. Okay, so week 13 assignments. So you're going to be reading chapter 11, Dividing Up Healthcare Resources, page 743 to 761. And you're going to be watching a couple of YouTube videos. Giving birth costs a lot. Hospitals won't tell you how much. The real reason American healthcare is so expensive. And there is only one discussion board this week. In that discussion board, you must read one of the additional readings given at the end of the chapter, which I've assigned to you as usual, as well as the videos. And I'll assign the readings. I'll assign those readings to you again. In your original post, you must provide a brief overview of your reading and answer the assigned questions. Then you must answer by using citations as well as real-life examples that support your answers. The questions for your readings. These answers must be at least 300 words altogether. You should complete your original post by Wednesday at 11:59 p.m. You must then respond to your groupmates' post from readings that you did not yourself read. Connect the post to the readings you did for this week. Be sure to respond to the people who responded to you. These responses are all due by Friday at 11:59 p.m. during week 13. So that's your week 13 assignments. And to reemphasize, they're down here. There are your links. Here's your link to the week 13 discussion board. The links to the videos that are right here. And then here's all those sweet assignments with questions and stuff. So week 14, there's no new reading from the major part of the text, but you do have new readings assigned in the discussion board prompt. You do have a little video to watch. You'll have to get access to Hulu, or whatever other way you watch Scrubs, the television series. And I want you to watch the season 1, episode 5 episode. I said episode a lot there. The season 1, episode 5 episode, I guess, of Scrubs that's called My Two Dads. And then you have the week 14 discussion board, and you have short essay 5 that's due that Friday as well. So it's easier to read from the actual thing here. So, no, that's not this. Yeah, week 14. Okay. So let me just read this to you. This week we have a slightly different kind of discussion. This is week 14. Once again, we have one discussion board post. You have no new reading, but you must watch the episode My Two Dads of the TV series Scrubs, which is available on Hulu, and I provided a wiki here that has some information on there for you. And in the episode, a discussion over healthcare resources, in this case insurance payments for surgeries, versus the well-being of a patient occurs. In your OP, I want you to provide an example that is relevant both to this episode and the readings from last week. You must discuss your example and its connection to our course materials this is too tiny for my eyes. There it is. You must discuss your example and its connection to our course materials for at least 200 words. Then you must ask 3 questions to your colleagues. The original post, whether you discuss the example and you give the 3 questions, is due Wednesday by 11:59 p.m. Then you must reply to each of your colleagues' posts and answer at least 1 question each. These replies should be between 30 and 100 words, and the response posts are due by Friday at 11:59 p.m. That's your normal stuff that's right there. So I wanted to go ahead and read that to you. It's a little bit different. It's a little bit lighter. And then short essay 5, which I've got on the slides here, but I'll actually pull it up and talk about it here. So in Unit 5, it's due Friday during week 14 by 11:59 p.m. So in Unit 5, we discuss the relationship between the medical world and dying, specifically on the ethical ramifications of euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide. In Unit 6, we discuss the bioethical issues surrounding justice in healthcare. While all of these discussions were going on, you as individuals have been living through one of the biggest health crises to ever occur, the COVID-19 pandemic. In this essay, I invite you to reflect on the relationship between the last 2 units of this course and the COVID-19 crisis. You may draw upon the COVID-19 discussion board for your inspiration, and be sure that your argument is original and not lifted accidentally from one of your sources. Provide hyperlinks where appropriate. I'm expecting an essay that reflects the fact that you've been in a writing intensive class on biomedical ethics for the last 14 weeks. However, because it's a reflection essay, it's a little bit different than the other essays that you've been asked to provide. What I would like you to do is actually, in this essay, you're showing me what you've learned this far in this particular class. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say in this essay. But maybe we should talk about Bioethics Chapter 11. If I shuffle the pages, for some reason I didn't include the actual title here. Chapter 11 is Dividing Up Healthcare Resources. Dividing up healthcare resources. Very much like real life Dr. Gross is, I can't talk and write at the same time. Okay, so in 2010, which is 10 years ago, almost 49 million people under the age of 65 were uninsured, and about almost 8 million of those were children. This is the United States. Nearly a third of the under 65 population, almost 90 million people, had no health insurance for at least part of 2006 or 2007. In 2013, just before the Affordable Care Act began to take effect, more than 44 million people under the age of 65 were without coverage. By 2016, there were still 27.6 million people under 65 who had no health insurance coverage. By the way, it's always 65 here because that's when you get Medicare. Reasons for lack of coverage include high cost of insurance, the absence of coverage acquired through employment, and the ineligibility for public coverage. There's a kind of sweet spot between poverty line and a job that would actually give you health insurance, and that's about a $20,000 a year gap. So justice, distributed justice, justice regarding the fair distribution of society's advantages and disadvantages, egalitarian theories of justice, doctrines affirming the importance, benefits, and burdens of society should be distributed equally. There are these 2 conceptions of justice, and I'm writing this to you speaking to you on Friday, March 20th of 2020. Hey, 2020. 2020. Okay. So I'm speaking to you Friday, March 20th of 2020, and you're listening to this a couple weeks later. And this morning I read articles that were about, should we distribute checks to every person in the country? Should we stall all student loan payments so we just get rid of student loans? That I think we all would agree would be awesome. What should we do? right? How do we get out? What do we do about the economy? And this is a hard thing to think about as an instructor while I'm thinking about how you're going to be perceiving this lecture when you hear it. It's not really a lecture as we've talked about in advance. So what we're doing today is we're talking about these different methods of thinking about the ethics of who gets what. Like some people don't have access to healthcare, and why? Because it's who their parents are, who they're born to, what's their economic situation, and so that's what we're going to be reflecting on in these last 2 weeks of class, or not last 2 weeks of class, but weeks 13 and 14 in our last unit. Libertarian theories of justice are a type of justice that hold that the benefit and burdens of society should be distributed through the fair workings of a free market and the exercise of liberty, rights of non-interference. That is, let the children die because what matters is a free market. Utilitarian theories of justice has doctrines that assert that a just distribution of benefits and burdens is one that maximizes the net good or utility for society. We talked about utilitarianism before, and this is one of the problematic things of this doesn't mean that everybody gets help. This means that if it costs too much money to help you, then you're kind of gonna die. Sorry, I'm in this kind of negative space. And speaking of negative space, the question becomes, do human beings have a right to health care? Is this something that should be a part of our rights? So it depends on what you think of what rights are. There's something called negative rights, which imposes a duty not to interfere with a person's obtaining something. And then there's a notion of positive rights, which imposes a duty to help someone in her efforts to get something. A right to health care refers to a positive right and involves the notion that society has an obligation to provide health benefits. Libertarians would reject the right to health care. Utilitarians could endorse a derivative right to health care, and egalitarians could favor a bona fide entitlement to a share of society's healthcare resources. That is, a right to a decent minimum of healthcare. In 2014, there was a Gallup poll. Gallup poll is like a conglomeration of people that do lots of polls. So that's why I keep saying Gallup. It's not referring to horses. I checked. Do you think, so this 2014 Horsey poll said, was a joke. This 2014 Gallup poll says, do you think it is the responsibility of the federal government to make sure all Americans have health care coverage, or is that not the responsibility of the federal government? So 45% of people polled said it is the responsibility, and 45% of people said it's, or 52% said that it is not. What I find interesting about these polls is who's answering their phone to these poll people to answer them in the first place, but sure. Gotta have a poll somehow. The human rights approach, justice in healthcare. So the idea is that we can best achieve just distribution of health and healthcare by ensuring that human rights in general are respected. Respecting human rights contributes to well-being and health, including access to healthcare. Respecting human rights encompasses fair treatment, freedom from coercion, non-discrimination, protection from abuse, equity, and other entitlements. That's one approach to healthcare. Rationing comes up into the question. That is, there's only a certain amount of materials that we have. Right now, there's the question of the rationing of things like ventilators, right? There's only so many ventilators in the United States. Rationing cannot be avoided. Ethical dilemmas arise most acutely among individual patients and providers who most contend with scarce life-saving resources. So they talk about transplants here in this slide, or I do anyway, but what I would like to do is pause here and talk to you about something that you might hear about. So I believe I've sent you emails about this before as well. You might be starting to hear about this idea of bioethicists coming into hospitals to determine who lives and who dies. That is a very scary thing to hear, but that's actually not what's going on. What's happening is every single hospital in the United States has an ethics committee, usually of one or more people, And often, if the hospital can afford it, they have a professional ethicist that's had a PhD in ethics or in philosophy or in biomedical ethics, and their job is to study complex ethical dilemmas. There's only so many ventilators in a hospital. There is a pandemic going on that affects people's lungs, and they have to be put on ventilators. Who gets the ventilators? How do we make those decisions? And those are very hard decisions for everybody, right? Ethicists are not going into hospitals to say who lives and who dies. They're there to assist in kind of navigating the complex waters of making those decisions, right? And that's where we get this concept of transplant. So making the slides was before the slides became about before the crisis, right? The central moral issue, you didn't see my hand motions there, which would have been really beneficial to you understanding what I meant there. So when you think about like a organ transplant, what criteria should be used to decide which patients get transplants, and who should make those decisions, right? Should it be me, Dr. Gross, the ethicist? I don't want that job. but there's ethics panels that help make those decisions, and what you're learning in this class are the basic ethical principles that people use to determine the right and wrong here. So the Affordable Care Act, just to give the major provisions, because we do live in these turbulent times, says that most individuals are required to have health insurance beginning in 2014. Individuals who do not have access to affordable employer coverage will be able to purchase coverage through health insurance exchange. Small businesses will be able to purchase coverage through a separate exchange. New regulations will impose on all health plans that will prevent health insurers from denying coverage to people for any reason, including health status, and from charging higher premiums based on health status and gender. There was a woman tax where women's health insurance was always more expensive before the ACA. And people like to say it's because women have vaginas or uteruses, or because women make babies, and that's why their insurance is more expensive. But men get hurt way more, and they're very expensive to treat when they smash themselves in a motorbike accident. So this idea that women cost more, therefore they should be allowed to be charged more, was very problematic. And so that was kind of done away with. And then more major provisions of this act were that Medicaid would be expanded upon to 133% of the federal poverty level, which is not, it's 14 grand a year for an individual, or 29 grand a year for a family of four in 2009. It's changed today. But the goal was to expand help to people that needed help. From 2010 to 2014, as the economy improved and the main provisions of the ACA, or Obamacare, what people call it, took effect, the number of uninsured among people under 35 dropped to 32 million. But the reasons for lack of coverage remained the same: high cost of insurance, the absence of coverage acquired through employment, and the ineligibility for public coverage. I know a lot of people in my graduate program who didn't have health insurance, and when there was a fine for not having health insurance, they decided to pay the fine because it was cheaper to pay the fine than it was to pay for monthly health insurance. My thinking was it would be much more expensive to, get into an accident and not be able to, pay for anything. But it's really hard to make these kinds of life decisions. So when in this class on bioethics, on biomedical ethics, you've been asked to learn about major concepts and major movements in bioethics, right? Because how do we make the kinds of important decisions that are being made now on television? Like, you see these bioethical questions on the news, and again, it's March 20th, 2020. I'm interested to see what it's going to be like when you actually go to do your assignments. So on that note, let's talk about week 15. While I have you here, I think I'll probably do another I'll do another lecture soon. But the very bottom, which I'll make live now. Ooh, I'm making it live while I'm recording this thing. So there's a final exam review discussion board and a final exam study guide. Do not open the final exam until you're ready to take it. But just to go on the discussion guide, or the study guide for the final exam, all the questions are here for the final exam. And your final exam discussion board is going to be to help you study for the final exam. And if you're concerned about that at all the questions are here. It's going to be 50 questions altogether, 5 from each chapter. They're all multiple choice, true-false questions. Vaughn chapters 1 through 6 and 8 through 10. It's worth 10% of your final grade, and we'll talk a little bit more about that for next time. I'll throw up another of these in a couple weeks. I'll wait to do the last podcast, the last lecture. All right, everybody. Well, I think we need to have Loki back after all that. I am so tired, and I know I sound like I'm tired, and I think it's mostly because I've just been sitting in my house next to this guy. This is still what he looks like, by the way. He's turned around a little bit, but he's really cute. And he's purring that nasally cat purr. It's very adorable. Okay, everybody, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, just send me an email, and well, you know what my email is, so go ahead and send me an email if you need to. All right, goodbye.